Alrighty, everybody, it is currently Friday, October 10th, 2025, and I'm coming at you live from the heart of darkness, the center of the Congolese rainforest. And I'm about to kill some rebels. God, that was my second take of that. On the first take, this is what I said verbatim. I'm coming at you from the central of the Congolese rainforest. I just recorded a 1 hour episode because so I'm gonna use that as my excuse as to why I said something just so I don't even know. Like that's not even dumb, right? That's not even I don't even think that's something a dumb person would say. I think that's something someone would say when they're having a stroke, which this whole episode is probably gonna sound like me having a stroke because I did just talk for an hour and 10 minutes straight. But and you guys that episode's already come out by now, so yeah, you guys know. Get the roommate back. Very annoying, but doesn't really matter too much because we're talking about a badass today. We're talking about a real, whether you love him or hate him, badass dude who did some badass shit. Um, and this is about war. You know, last episode I started and I was talking about Kurdish rebels and all that bullshit. But the reason I was talking about all that was because I was like, I haven't been doing a ton of war episodes lately, just because I've done so many recently. But then, you know, I took a page out of Michael Jackson's book. I didn't allegedly molest any children. He didn't do that. I didn't do that. What I did was I took a look at the man in the mirror, and the man in the mirror said, "Dude, no one fucking listens to this anyways. Who gives a shit what you talk about?" That's what the man in the mirror said to me. The man in the mirror was like, "Dude, you could just plug in your microphone and scream for an hour straight, not even saying words, just for an hour straight, and it would produce the same result." So that's what the man in the mirror told me. So I was like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna do a war episode." And I really like Cold War African history. To me, it's the Wild West. It was like lawlessness. There wasn't borders or like countries. There was like tribes fighting each other, all that stuff. A lot of stuff like that still is going on in Africa, but I mean, it was at its height during the Cold War. Um, right now, it's you got a little bit of that, but it's mostly uh, Muslim terrorist groups killing innocent people. That's most of what's going on, and it's going on all over Africa. By now, I'm sure everyone has, got black pilled or red pilled or whatever and heard about the genocide of Christians in Nigeria, Nigerian Christians. Everyone's heard of that by now, and everyone's being like, why are they talking about Palestine? They should be talking about the genocide of Nigerian Christians, which this is what I want to say about that. The reason people are talking about Palestine is because the government of the United States of America is funding that genocide. We are giving Israel fucking hellfire missiles to blow up toddlers on tricycles. That's why everyone's talking about Israel and Palestine right now. And, if you're a Christian, obviously your allegiance is to Christians, right? Obviously, God above fucking government. If you don't believe that, I don't know. I just guess you're not that religious. Um, but what was I gonna say? But yeah, that's why people are talking about Palestine. It's not because they necessarily don't care about Christians, although I'm sure a lot of the people that are vehemently pro-Palestine do not give a shit about Christians and, their rights and oppression worldwide. I'm sure they don't really care that much about it. But the main reason why most people, including me, are talking about Palestine is because that's I don't pay taxes. Fuck that. I'm not doing that. But most people do pay taxes, and those people are having their taxes go to Israel, first of all, which is crazy in and of itself. And then once the money is in Israel, it is being used to purchase weapons uh, to kill innocent children, right? That's why people are talking more about Palestine, is because America's funding it. Now, the genocide in Nigeria is horrible and fucked up, and should people care about it? Yes. But it's like, I'm not paying for it, so it's just not as much of an issue for me, right? If the United States government was paying, these Al Qaeda splinter cells or whatever they are, maybe ISIS splinter cells at this point, which ISIS is a splinter cell of Al Qaeda, whatever. If America was paying them to kill Christians in Africa, then I'm sure people here would care about it. Maybe no, they probably would care about it as much because they're black people. Um, if they were white people, yeah, the left wouldn't care that much. I'm kind of sick and tired of people pretending like or like people on the left pretending like they don't hate white people or that they don't have uh I don't know, ill will towards it. They just don't care about white people as much, which I I understand the reasons behind that, but it is in and of itself like it's a dumb school of thought to be like, well, for 500 years white people have lived well, so therefore I don't really give a shit about what's going on with them, right? Like that's kind of the argument that the left has for not caring about, the issues of white people, or when something, bad happens to white people, they're like, well, you lived good for 500 years, and it's like I didn't live good for five people that looked like me live. And to be fair, I'm living very good. I live in America. Anyone that lives in America is living good. um but yeah, it's just a retarded argument, just being like, well, you lived. And you could do that with literally any group of people, right? Like Western Africa is a complete hellhole right now. You got Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Liberia, fucking Mauritania, all that bullshit in West Africa right now. And it's hellish. It's horrible. But I mean, for a, hundreds of years before it became a complete shit show, they were some of the richest people on the planet there. Mansa Musa is the most famous one, but they had it going on like that. They were trading with the Portuguese, selling a few slaves here and there, and they had it going on like that. So it's like, well, I don't care about, the oppression of people in West Africa because they had it good before that. And look, I'm not saying that there's any white country that's in the same predicament as Sierra Leone. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying that that's how dumb your argument sounds. Your argument sounds like, well, Mauritania used to be rich as shit, so I don't care about the slavery that's going on there. It's like that doesn't make any sense. Now, do I care about what's going on in Mauritania? Not that much, right? For the same reason I don't care what's going on in Europe. I'm an American. It's my God given right to not give a shit about what's going on basically in any other country. We got to worry about Mexico a wee bit. Even Canada, we can kind of fucking completely ignore. Mexico's the only one, and a few islands there in the Caribbean. We got to care about those ones. But other than that, I'm an American. I don't have to give a shit about what's going on. I have a fucking 2,000-mile wall separating me from the nearest continents, or I guess South America we're technically connected to, but whatever. You guys know what I mean. I don't have to give a shit. It's like the people being like, well, if Russia beats Ukraine, then they're gonna feel emboldened and they're gonna attack America. And it's like, if they want to attack America, you know what they're gonna have to do? Cross 2,000 miles of fucking open ocean. They're not gonna touch us. The most recent attack on America, I guess 9/11 technically, but inside job. But like the most recent like major one was Pearl Harbor, and the closest they got to us was Hawaii, and Hawaii is 10,000 fucking miles from any piece of land. Hawaii is in the middle of the goddamn fucking ocean. So no, I don't think Russia's going to attack America after being emboldened by beating Ukraine. I don't think that's going to happen. And they're not going to beat Ukraine. Russia can't even keep a fucking cap on the Chechens and the Daggies. They're not going to beat Ukraine. All right, let's be realistic about this for 2 seconds. They can't. 2 million fucking Chechens took on the entire Russian army and won. Ukraine has nothing to worry about whether America funds them or not. Um, but war is interesting. This kind of, I guess, is related to today's episode because the guy we're talking about, he is a mercenary, and there's a lot of mercenary type stuff going on in Ukraine and Russia right now. Obviously, you have the Wagner Group, who, if you don't know, they were involved in the Central African Republic, and that's a crazy fucking story that we're not going to talk about. But you got the Wagner Group. Those are all. It's basically a government-owned mercenary group. That's basically what Wagner is. But then you got the people going over to fight on the Ukraine side, right? Like these independent, not contractors, just straight up volunteers going over there and volunteering for the Ukrainian military, which I would never in a million fucking years do. I don't want to be in Ukraine in the first place, let alone a fucking war zone in Ukraine. It's like everything's gray, and now it's also exploding and on fire. Uh, for Ukraine, I don't know. I guess if you want to do it, I guess if you really believe that the freedom of the Ukrainian people means that much to you, do it. It's your choice, but it's kind of related to what we got going on here today. Weird fucking, foreign involvement in like these seemingly regional wars. It's what's exactly going on. Because today we're talking about a guy by the name of Mad Mike Hoare. It's Hoare. I heard him called like Hoare or Hor. Uh, but that was by a guy who sounded like he was from fucking Uganda, so I'm sure he doesn't know how to pronounce the name either, or maybe he does. Maybe he did an iota more research than me and he figured out how to say it. But I think it's Mad Mike Hoare, which I guess that's the guy's name. Look, I would be a fucking mercenary in the Congo too if my name was Mad Mike Hoare. Or I'm sure it's Hoare, or some shit like that. So Thomas Michael Hoare was born on St. Patrick's Day, 1919, to Irish parents in Calcutta, British India. And yes, this is the same Calcutta as Mother Teresa, who was maybe a human trafficker, but that's not the point here. The point is, this dude has like British, colonialism in his blood. He's from Ireland, which was kind of colonized by the British. Or I guess he's Irish by blood. And then he was born in India. So this guy has just grown up in like this world surrounded by British colonialism. He he I guess it's kind of hard. It's hard to say. He doesn't think that like whites inherently have a right to the land, but he does. He's not British. He grew up a lot in Britain, but he's not really British like that. He grew up and he lived by choice, everywhere that he moved after he grew up. He was living in former colonies, basically. I think he did move back. He moved somewhere for a short while because he was in exile, but this guy, major thing to know from the fact that he was born in British India is just he's colonial. He's not British like that, right? I think that's the thing, a lot of people think about, Rhodesians, right? Is they're like, oh, well, these are British people, or even South African people now, or Afrikaners, right? White South Africans. They're like, oh, well, these people are European, and it's like they're not, dude. They weren't born in Europe. They don't really care that much about Europe, right? They might a little bit. That might be like God Save the Queen, but they don't really care that much about it. England is not this man's home. I'll say that much. That's what I'll boil the whole thing down to. England is not his home. He's a colonial guy. So when he was 8, he was sent to study in England to be trained in accountancy, but he was unable to attend Sandhurst, which is a college. So he joined the Territorial Army. And this is the weird thing. I don't know exactly how like like the system works like that. I think his parents were probably pretty well off because they said he was sent to like I think it was called St. Mary's College or something like that. And the way it was written made it seem like he was sent there like when he turned 8. So I think maybe they would like call it a college, but it's almost like a priest type thing where back in the day priests would be like people would be very young, they'd be like 12 or 13 years old and they'd be sent to study, theology or whatever. I think that's basically what this is for, but for being an accountant. Like the whole priest thing, I do understand being like, we got to get these motherfuckers trained up young, not only so the elder priests can have holes to fill, but also so they can just learn the Bible's a very big, complicated thing, and the way each individual sect of the religion views it is even more complicated. So I I understand that for like the Bible, but for like being an accountant, I guess they didn't have like Excel or anything back then. So it was probably like 1,000 times harder to do. But it is just very funny that he was 8 years old and they were like, "You're gonna be an accountant." I could tell. I could tell this kid, he just can't keep his hands off the fucking keyboard, dude. He wants to enter numbers all day. And he was at a college too. Uh but he was unable, I guess to officially get his certification in accountancy. So he joined the Territorial Army. And the Territorial Army, I think, is exactly what it sounds like. I couldn't find too much about it because the hyperlink that linked to the article about the Territorial Army linked to the Army Reserves of the British Army, which I guess that's what the Territorial Army must have been back then. And he also wasn't born in Britain and all that stuff, so I'm sure he wasn't, treated the exact same as someone who would be born in Britain. So he's in the Territorial Army, which is kind of like the reserves, and they get a lot of the shitty jobs. So at the beginning of World War II, he joined the London Irish Rifles and fought the Japanese in Burma and India, and he eventually reached the rank of major, which I think that's pretty fucking. Granted, this isn't like a super fucking elite unit. At least I don't think so. The Irish or the London Irish Rifles, it's not like the SAS or some of these more hardcore units. So I'm sure as long as you do a decent job, you can get pretty high up. But major, that's very high up in the army. I'm trying to think. It goes sergeant, uh, lieutenant, captain, major. I think it goes like that. So yeah, this guy's pretty high up in there. He's like sergeants are in charge of, depending on, obviously there's like master sergeant, all that bullshit in there, but they're in charge of like a squad sized element, which is like 5 people, to like a platoon sized element, which can be 50 people. And then like a captain or a lieutenant is involved or is in charge of a platoon sized element, but like a high ranking sergeant could also be, although I don't know how the British Army works. But like captain would be in charge of a company. So I think major is maybe, I don't think it's battalion command, but it is very high up there. This is a guy who could, in theory, not see too much like combat with his own eyes, or not be involved in combat too much. He'll probably see it, but he won't be too involved in it. And also, it depends. There's a ton of different fucking variables in there, and the fucking ranking systems are weird, dude. It's like sometimes the motherfuckers are corporal. Some I don't know how it works at all. Uh, so he fought in World War II, though. He fought in Burma, which is present day Myanmar, and he fought in India, obviously. And he fought in like a super important battle in India. I don't remember what it's called, but we're going to kind of skip over this because we're mostly going to be talking about his mercenary work in Africa. So after the war, he became an accountant. He officially got his accountant shit, and he moved to Durban, South Africa to manage safaris and work as a soldier for hire because he found London boring. So the reason he moved to Durban, South Africa in the first place was he's just like, London is boring as shit. And then he moved to Durban, which it's definitely not as boring as London, but it's not it's not maybe what you think of when you think of South Africa. Like, this is, you got to remember, this is even pre-apartheid times. Apartheid hadn't even been invented yet. Black people probably weren't even considered people at this point in South Africa. And I think Durban was a mostly white city and a mostly white state. I think it was. I don't know if it's states or provinces in South Africa, but so it's not exactly what you think of when you think of Africa with like fucking giant shanty towns and AK-47s being put to people's heads and stuff like that. It's a more chill environment, but definitely not the most chill environment. It's more interesting than London, but definitely not that much more interesting than London. You know what I mean? So he worked as an accountant during this time. He also did the safari shit and the soldier for hire shit, but even that wasn't interesting enough for him. So he sought adventure by marathon walking, which I don't know what that is. That kind of just sounds like hiking to me. Driving his motorcycle from Cape Town, South Africa to Cairo, which, if you don't know, he basically drove a motorcycle lengthwise across Africa. So, yeah, in a fucking motorcycle in, what would this be, the 1940s. These motherfuckers, Africa still doesn't have paved roads like that. So this guy was just trudging through fucking mud on a 1940s motorcycle for the entire distance of Africa. It's fucking insane. And he also, what the fuck? Oh, he also searched for the lost city of the Kalahari. Goddamn, I cannot read my own handwriting sometimes. So the lost city of the Kalahari, that's just kind of a classical, I don't know if it's exactly an El Dorado type thing, but I do imagine it's on a pretty similar level. So this guy's just loving adventure. I don't know why they included the marathon walking thing. That sounds like pickleball, right? Where you're just like, oh, well, that's something old people do so that their joints don't fall apart or whatever. That's what marathon walking sounds like to me. And then it's also like, yeah, he rode his motorcycle across an entire continent and searched in the desert for a lost city. So, yeah, pretty, I would say borderline sociopathic guy, psychopathic guy, like a real fucking, adrenaline junkie. And that's like a mistake I think a lot of people make about like psychopaths and stuff, where they're like, oh, they just want to kill people. They don't have a problem with killing people, but a lot of them are just like adrenaline junkie types. You know what I mean? They just don't give a fuck about anything and they kind of do whatever they want whenever they want. And that to me kind of sounds like this guy Mad Mike Hoare, because he also had like a wife and 3 kids at this point, and he was like, "All right, babe, I'm gonna dip out and ride my fucking bike across Africa." Which, to be fair, this is the 1940s, 50s, so the woman doesn't really have a say in what you can do. So I'm sure guys back then were doing a lot more shit like that. But I do think there is just something psychotic about it, where it's like you got a wife and kids at home, man. If he was just doing this shit on his own, I'd be like, this guy fucking rules, just living the life. But it's like you're neglecting your family to drive your fucking motorcycle across Africa. I don't know. That's just kind of what it read like to me. This guy's a real fucking adrenaline junkie, I think, even if he's not like a psycho or whatever. So anyway, in the early 60s, he finally ditched accounting, deciding to return to his life as a soldier in the Congo crisis. Which this was 1961. That is also when his first wife left him. Presumably because at this point he was 42 years old, and he was like, all right, babe, I'm going to go be a mercenary in the Congo, which the Congo crisis, I, I don't know where the names for like these wars come from, right? Like we talked about the Malayan emergency. We talked about all this shit, and they all have like these different like weird names for it. The Congo crisis, it was a war. It was a big butt fuck of a civil war. It wasn't North versus South. It was North versus East versus West versus fucking Northwest. It was a big fucking shit show. Maybe that's why they call it the crisis, because they're like, this fucking thing is so hard to decipher that I don't know what's going on. I think another reason is at this point the central Congolese like federal government, they didn't have it going on like that. So maybe that's why they called it a little bit more of a crisis, because it was like this isn't like regular armies fighting against each other. This is just a complete shit show. Maybe that's why they called it. I don't know. So, but Mike is gonna get involved in this crisis. Is he gonna make things better or is he gonna make things worse? I don't know. It's hard to say. So, during the Congo crisis, Mike would command 2 separate mercenary groups. He had it going on like that, and he was a real fucking. He loved the mercenary shit. I think, knowing what I know about the guy, he probably preferred to be a mercenary over someone in the regular army, just because it's like it's adventurous. It's just way more adventurous. If you're in the Marine Corps or whatever, you're just gonna get your papers to go to Okinawa or whatever. Whereas if you're a mercenary, you can kind of pick and choose a little bit more. Especially at this point, and especially in Africa, we got the Congo crisis going on. The Rhodesian Bush War is starting to heat up. The Kenya's a fucking shit show. It's just war all across Africa at this point. So if you were a mercenary in Africa, it's kind of like being like an AI programmer now. Where it's like the fucking eating's good, man. If you're a mercenary in Africa in the early 60s, you got your choice. You don't have to be picky about which conflict you're going to go fight in. You have a whole lot of shit like that. And all of these, because you got to remember 1940s through the 70s-ish is when we have the decolonization really of the world. Particularly Africa, but you also have like India is decolonized at that point, Southeast Asia decolonized. A lot of these places are being decolonized. So these are new governments that are they haven't even been set up yet, right? Like that's a major feature of decolonization, especially in Africa, where it's like they just didn't even bother to set up a government. They were just like, go go fucking go. It would be like if the government of the United States pulled out and they were like, we were like, what the fuck are we going to do? And they were like, just someone needs to go into the White House and then that guy's the president, is basically what's going on here. And so obviously these governments were forced to hire mercenaries with whatever money they did have. And so that's kind of why mercenary work was so good at this time. These governments, they didn't have these strong regular armies, right? Obviously, before that, the British had been the ones, sending men there, controlling the armies, doing all that stuff. So these new governments are like, what the fuck? Although the Congo is not a British colony, it's a Belgian colony. So, but still, I imagine it's the same situation of being like, well, you wanted to be free. We're going to take a bunch of shit and then you're going to be free. And good luck with it, right? Like I think the America comparison is kind of a decent one, but there's really is no comparison for it because they had this government. They were being governed. Were they being governed well? In some cases it was actually pretty decent. Some cases not so fucking much. So there's just not a government anymore, right? Like if the government just ceased to exist in America and there was no military or anything like that, it might be chill for a minute, but pretty soon shit's gonna start popping off, right? And so that's what was going on in Africa at this time. So his first command would be the 4 Commando in Katanga province in 1961, which 4 Commando, I think it's like there's the original French name for it, but I mean that is a pretty sick sounding name. First of all, Commando in and of itself, you're thinking of Rambo or some other sick shit like that. But the 4 Commando, I don't like having teams of commandos as an army. Not even because like commando means you kind of do what you fucking want to do, right? Back to like the Marine comparison. Marines are just like, hey, go take that hill. If you're a commando, you're probably behind enemy lines and you're not in contact really with the fucking, main army. So you can kind of do whatever you want. And I think that's why they called these guys commandos. Now, granted, commandos in the American military are a lot more like regulated and disciplined and all that stuff. And they know what they're doing better than these fucking mercenaries in the Congo while the Congo is basically on fire. But it's a similar thing, right? They're not like getting exact orders of what to fucking do from the main army. And it's this entire group of them, right? And that's what they do for the entire war. So less than a year after the Congo gained independence from Belgium, a separatist group began to rise up in the mineral-rich Katanga province, which Katanga, that's a very good name, very African-sounding name as well. I commend them for that. That's it's like Mukumbura. Have you ever heard that name? That to me just has, it feels like fucking Africa to me when someone says it. Same with Katanga, or Katanga, I guess. Katanga. I am from Katanga. You see me. I have this AK-47. A witch doctor put a spell on me, and now I am immune to bullets. That's like what Katanga sounds like to me. Like when I hear the word Katanga, that I just hear that voice in my head. I am from Katanga. I will kill the enemy. If the enemy want to kill me, he will not do it. That's my African militiaman voice. But there's this whole thing going on. This whole uprising in the Katanga province. Immediately after they got independence. They got independence in 1960, like late 1960, and immediately the Katanga province is like, fuck you guys, we're going to do our own thing. And I don't even know that it keeps saying the Congo crisis and all that stuff. I know the Belgian Congo was the name of the colony. Okay, so I thought it was at this time called Zaire. No, it's not called Zaire. It was called Zaire from 1965 to 1991. So at this time, yeah, it is the Congo. They might not even know. The Congo is fucking insane. It is. People think the Amazon rainforest is crazy, and it is. Dude, the Congo is so fucking insane. that like the most one of the most famous war films of all time is based off of just how the Congo can drive a person who isn't from there insane. Like that's how insane the fucking Congo is. People who live in the Congo now might not know what country they live in. It is so isolated. It's just a huge fucking marsh swamp. There's mountains all over it. It is if you ever wanted to like start an uprising anywhere, it would be in the Congo because it's just so hard to mobilize troops in that area. But Mike Hoare kind of figured out a way around this. So, this uprising in the Katanga province was supported by Belgian mining interests and Western powers who were concerned about Soviet influence in the area. And if you listen to the Rhodesian Bush War episode or the Malayan Emergency episode, which I guess doesn't apply as much to this, but basically all the countries that were being decolonized at this point had communist militia groups in them. Even if it wasn't like the main thing that was going on, they still had pretty large communist-backed militia groups. Some were backed by the Soviets, some were backed by the Chinese, and at this point, the Chinese and the Soviets are not getting along, even though they're both communist. So this is going on all over Africa. Literally every single one. That's, I think Nelson Mandela, the African National Congress. I think that was maybe not now, but definitely at some point was a Marxist organization, and that's what a lot of these groups are. So, but this group, I guess, isn't it. There really is no rebels in this situation. I was trying to be like, well, these guys are the rebels, and then these guys. No one's really a rebel in this situation, right? Because in order to be a rebel, you need to have like some power to be fighting against. But at this point in the Congo, they do not have that power. There is nothing. There's really nothing to be fighting against. It and even if you win, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be like this free, self-governing place, right? Because even within your own province, there's probably people rebelling against you. Like I said, everyone's fighting everybody. It's a complete shit show. So Mad Mike was hired by Katangan president Moisi Tishambe, I think that's how you say it, and proceeded to recruit ex-soldiers from the UK, France, and South Africa. That's his main force for the 4 Commando. He gets some different dudes for the 5 Commando. Spoiler alert, that's the sequel. We could have gone 4 Commando to Electra Boogaloo, but they decided to go with 5 Commando. Hey, not what I would have said, but it's your choice. But this original group was the UK, France, and South Africa, and they're fighting well. They're doing a lot of good shit for Katanga and all that stuff. Or maybe not good, but good for Moise Tishambe. But they're not. This isn't where they gain their fame. So the 4 Commando was incredibly disciplined and ultimately gained a Soldier of Fortune moniker. So those two, to me at least, can kind of get messed up a little bit, right? Because it's like Soldier of Fortune. I'm imagining some dude who's like going through this country, plundering, killing, doing all that stuff. But I guess they were very disciplined, and that was like a big thing that Mike did, right? Like when Mike would get these dudes, he would immediately weed out anyone that he didn't think was disciplined enough. Now, maybe they're not referring to discipline in terms of how they live their lives, but how they perform combat, right? Because in combat, discipline is very important, right? Panic is that's how the whole situation gets fucked up, right? So maybe they're talking about the way they fought was incredibly disciplined. They held their lines, they took their angles well, they didn't like fall back when something went wrong or whatever. I'd assume maybe that's what they're talking about in regards to discipline. But also, Mike would make them all get haircuts and like shave their faces and all that stuff. So maybe they were disciplined in every aspect other than massacring people and looting, because they did do a little bit of that. A little bit, not too much. It really isn't as bad as you might think, but they did do enough of it to be concerned, or for it to just be not great, right? They weren't the greatest group of people. They weren't the worst. You'd think white mercenaries in Africa would be just horrible fucking racists killing every black person they see. The four commando weren't exactly nice, but they weren't as bad as you might think. So anyway, the four commando fought using guerrilla tactics against Soviet and Cuban-backed rebel groups. And I don't remember exactly when it was. It was either when he was in charge of the four commando or the five commando. It was at some point in his, Congolese campaign. Che Guevara was in the Congo at this point. He was in Africa, and the Cubans were heavily involved in Africa. Not only in terms of like backing these groups, but like sending men to fight there. Like Angola had a fuck ton of Cubans there. So, and that, I don't know. It, to me, that's just so interesting, right? Like this ideology of communism, and I guess it makes sense, right? Workers of the world unite. It's not divided along country lines and all that stuff. Now, granted, it's gonna be tough to unite Africans, especially in the fucking Congo, dude. You're not gonna like get them to unite under the banner of communism like that, right? They just have these tribal traditions that have gone back for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's not gonna be like China or whatever, where it's just like everyone's the fucking same. Just go to the factory and work hard. That's gonna be incredibly hard to do in the Congo. But they seems like they did a pretty decent job at it because Che Guevara did not get killed in the Congo. So anyway, Katanga would ultimately fall to the central government in 1963. 2 years, but and Mike didn't do too much, or at least that we know of, didn't do too much. He wrote, I think, 7 books over the course of his life. A few of them were about the conflicts and all that stuff. Some of them weren't. Some of them were just insane shit that he decided to write about. This guy was fucking insane. But he's fighting communists in Africa, in the Congo specifically, and he hated communists. Once again, you might think this guy grew up in like colonial Britain. You might think he's like super racist. He's not that racist. I'll read you this direct quote, or not direct quote, but a paraphrase of a quote from Mike. So Mike, he thought that like black people lived well, and they knew how to live, but he didn't think they understood the sacrificial spirit of large scale warfare. So, and that was the reason why he only recruited white troops. Is he was like, these people, they have like that mindset of being like, we gotta die for the greater good, or whatever, or even not. We just have to fight and die, right? Like that's a European mindset. Europe has been locked, or had been locked in like continuous wars with each other for centuries and centuries and centuries. Africa has had a lot of wars there, especially recently. But like in the Congo, these people are the large scale warfare is almost impossible to conduct in the Congo. It is like you cannot imagine how fragmented this country is in terms of like just geography. Not even along ethnic lines, but just physically fragmented. And so they didn't really have that long history of just large scale warfare, for the queen, running into the enemy's lines and slashing them with swords and all that stuff. That wasn't going on in Africa. And so Mike might have been racist, but he was also kind of partially correct about that, right? Where Africa just, it doesn't have, especially this part of Africa, other parts of Africa definitely do, but this part of Africa does not have that history in it. It doesn't, right? Like Zulu culture, yeah, they kind of got a little bit of that. Up in North Africa, yeah, they definitely have that, but in the Congo, no, they don't have that. And the way he talked about how they lived, he was like, dude, these people fucking rule. He might have been a little bit racist, but it wasn't enough to be like, we need to exterminate the blacks. The way he talked about it was like, they go out, they farm, they get enough food to keep their family alive, and then they go home and they drink beer that their wife brews for them. He was like, and that's the perfect life. So he was kind of jealous of these dudes. He was a little bit jealous of them. He's a bit of a Colonel Kurtz, right? Where he sees the way they live and the way they fight and all that stuff, and he's like, these guys fucking rule. And I'm talking about Colonel Kurtz from the book Heart of Darkness. Although uh, Apocalypse Now is pretty similar. So yeah, I don't think it was that racist. He was a dude who grew up in like Britain in or the British colonies in the early 1900s, or I guess mid 1900s. So I'm sure he was a little bit racist, but yeah, I don't think, like, some people might hear white dude that grew up in the British colonies in, the mid 1900s and be like, okay, well, that guy wants to kill everyone who is not pure white. But yeah, I don't think that's who Mike is. He just really loved war. So uh, in 1964, Moise Tshombe, who is now the prime minister of the Congo, brought Mike back to fight against the leftist Simba rebels. Again, Mike is fighting against the communists, and he fucking hates them. Mike hates the communists so much. He, in an interview, and this isn't during the war. This is like decades after. This was like a color TV interview. He was like, "Yeah, communists are vermin, and I wish I would have killed them all." He despised communists. He hated them so much. Literally everything he did once he became a mercenary would be to fight against the communists. He just hated them so much. Like, you think your fucking uncle at Thanksgiving or whatever, you think that guy hates communists? You think your MAGA uncle hates communists? Mike Hoare hates communists. He's literally hunting these people down, using a commando force in Africa to fucking hunt communists down. He hates them. Literally going through hell, getting fucking malaria, trudging through the jungle, mosquito bit all the fuck up, no equipment, no food, hunting these communists down to kill them. And the Simba rebels were particularly bad communists. And the Simba rebels, it started with this one rebellion, but then eventually all the rebellions in the Congo came to be known as Simbas, and they were brutal. They were, like, quite frankly, most of the other communist militias in Africa at the time hated would instantly kill white people, hated them, uh, took them captive, hated Christianity, all that stuff. And Mike is a fucking Irish dude. He might have been born in India, but he still got that Irish spirit. He loves the Pope. All right, Mike loves the Pope. He's not gonna let you mess with Christianity, even if it is those dirty Protestants. And he's gonna kill the communists. And that's just like this. He hates them. He really does not like them at all. So, and fun fact about the Simba rebels. So the Simba rebels, obviously, they're these super tribal people from extremely rural areas of the Congo. And so obviously there was a lot of like traditional witchcraft involved. And one thing that they did was the witch doctor or whatever would perform a ritual on you to make you immune to bullets. But what you had to do was, before every battle, you had to wave palm fronds in the air and go like, my, 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 and just like say that over and over and chant it. And my, I think, if I remember correctly, eventually, kind of floated around like the mercenary world, got translated to Mau Mau, and then Mau Mau's became known, or these warlords in Kenya basically became known as Mau Mau's, which I think is just very interesting. Like, that this weird, witch doctor practice in the Congo kind of made its way through these mercenary, former colonies, whatever, and became known as the Mau Mau's in Kenya. Interesting to me. So Tshombe wanted to keep the military weak in order to prevent coups, so he only brought in trusted mercenaries. So the main general of the Congolese army at this time, he had been involved in like at least 4 coup attempts. And you got to remember, this is 1964. This is 4 years after the Congo has gained independence from Belgium. They're not even Zaire yet, right? Like, Zaire is the old name for the Congo. The old, it's just and they're not even at that point yet. And there has been 4 fucking coup attempts by this one general. So Tshombe was kind of right about that. He was like, yeah, we ain't playing with you. And so that's why he brought in trusted mercenaries once he became the prime minister. And that's why he brought in Mike, because Mike had fought pretty fucking hard for him when he was the president of Katanga. So the 5 Commando, which is what they came to be known as, was an all-white force of 300 men, mostly from South Africa, but there were Rhodesians, British, Belgians, Irish, and Germans. So, and most of the Germans were SS. A lot of these guys were SS. And at this point, you're thinking of Rhodesia and you're thinking of Zimbabwe. A lot of the guys were from there. He put an ad out actually in Salisbury, which is now Harare, which is the capital of Rhodesia and Zimbabwe. Or it was the capital of Rhodesia and then it became the capital of Zimbabwe. But a lot of these Rhodesian guys are from northern Rhodesia and Nyasa land, which is Zambia and Malawi. That's what they're called nowadays. And that's where a lot of those guys are from. At this point, the Rhodesians were kind of busy fighting their own war, and a lot of these quote unquote Rhodesians who were from northern Rhodesia and Nyasa land had seen basically what the Simbas were doing had been done to like the white people in their country. You know, they had been killed, their land had been stolen from them, all that horrible stuff. So they were like, fuck yeah, let's go fucking fight. And obviously the South African aspect of it is we want white people in power in South Africa because if we're the only white controlled country in South Africa, we're kind of or the only white controlled country in Africa, then we're kind of fucking shit out of luck. You know, especially even if there's other white leaders, if they're communists, we're also shit out of luck. And so that's why, you know, South Africans were so down to go fight with the 5 Commando in the Congo. And then also the Germans, almost all of them were World War II vets. And the reason they came to the Congo was because they just, you know, they were Nazis. You know, even if they weren't officially put on trial or whatever, I imagine being a Nazi in Europe or in Germany, and especially being an ex-SS Nazi, was a horrible fucking life. And I'm not saying it should have been a good life, but that's kind of why they linked up with these mercenaries. So Mike insisted that his men were volunteers and that he was a romantic who was fighting for martial glory. So basically this one guy was like, you guys were mercenaries, right? And he was like, I mean, yes, we fought for pay, but we didn't fight for that much pay. And we also, you know, we just didn't make that much money. So it's like, it doesn't make sense to like give them this moniker of mercenary or whatever, or soldier of fortune, when they don't make that much money, right? They're not soldiers of fortune. They're soldiers of a modest income. It was a decent amount of money, but it wasn't that much money. And they were also technically a part of the regular Congolese army, but they basically acted independently. So the 5 Commando had racist views towards blacks and were known for their ravenous plunder as they moved through the Congo. So yeah, a lot of the guys in there were probably racist, especially those Rhodesians who had just like watched, right? Who had just watched like their family be slaughtered for being white, you know? So I'm sure a lot of those guys were racist. They were accused of war crimes. It's questionable as to whether these war crimes happened or not. I'd venture to say they probably had a few going on. There was a big thing that the 5 Commando did, which they would kill these Simba rebels, and then they would put the heads of the rebels on their jeeps, right? Which, to me, I hear that and I'm like, look, I'm not going to instantly accuse you of, you know, burning down villages or whatever, but I think you might have committed a couple war crimes in there if you're putting heads on jeeps. Although maybe they didn't. Maybe they just really fucking, like Mike. I don't think Mike was, you know, terribly racist or anything. He might have just hated these people so much because they were communist. But I don't know about the rest of these guys. I can't speak, you know, we don't really know too much about the rest of these guys. We do know a whole lot about Mike though. So this is so sick. So Mike led the 5 Commando from the front. So he was in the fucking action with these guys. You got to remember, this guy's a major. Majors in the American Army are like sitting back in a Jeep watching the guys doing what they're doing. So Mike he's in the shit with the guys, literally in front of them. And the reason he did that was to inspire them to fight harder, because it's like, if this dude, if the major, if the leader of this whole thing is fighting this hard, then fuck it, I gotta fight that hard too. So that's very sick. And then also the other thing that he did was that was sick as shit is he once pistol whipped a commander who tried to start a mutiny. I got to imagine they're in the middle of the fucking Congo. They've been trudging along for a month or whatever. They're bug bitten to shit, itchy as hell, haven't eaten, thirsty as fuck, and these guys are trying to fight back against Mike. Mike grabs his gun and just pistol whip that for 40 minutes straight. You know, that boozy song? I imagine that's what Mike was doing. Mike did not play no shit, dude. Made his boys have haircuts. He said, I don't give a fuck if we're in the middle of the jungle. You're going to keep your face clean shaven. And if you fuck with me, I will pistol whip your ass. God damn, this dude is so fucking sick, dude. And he's a little bit racist, but he's not as racist as he could be. And this is just how they fought, basically. So Mike was known for hijacking boats and taking them upriver to rescue hostages from poorly trained and armed Simba rebels. Yeah, these Simba rebels had like World War II era guns, and I'm sure guns from even before that. They thought bullets were going to hit them and then turn into water. These guys were fucking not really a worthy enemy for Mike. The only thing that made these guys a worthy enemy for Mike was the fact that they were guerrilla fighters who outclassed them in terms of like terrain, knowledge and mobility and stuff like that. That was really the only thing these rebels had over Mike, and also numbers, but he was fucking these dudes up. He was destroying them. He has some crazy estimates as to how many Simbas they killed, but they probably killed a fuck ton of them. So he would hijack these boats, take them upriver, rescue these hostages, and get back down, which is very fucking sick. I just imagine him flying on a boat, Mike out front, dude, pointing, we're gonna go get him. God damn, this guy's so fucking sick. And in 1964, the 5 Commando would rescue 1,600 foreign nationals and 150 Congolese civilians who were being held hostage in an operation known as Dragon Rogue. Okay? And this isn't like a single operation where he got, 1,600 people on a fucking cruise ship and took it down the river. This was a whole bunch of shit, but still, 1,600 hostages and 150 Congolese citizens. Dragon Rogue. This dude is hijacking boats, got an operation called Dragon Rogue, and rescuing 1,600 hostages. And that's just from Dragon Rogue. Or I guess it's 1,700 hostages, really, because the Congolese are hostages, but the 1,600 were, I think they were mostly European. I think that's why they made that distinction there. But, I mean, god damn. 1,700 hostages in one operation. And he was going, like, deep upriver. Just fucking, with his old fucking, FAL or whatever, 308, blowing dudes' fucking heads off. God damn. He was so sick. So, all in all, Mike Hoare and the 5 Commando rescued 2,000 European hostages and killed 5 to 10,000 Simba rebels as estimated by Mike. I don't know how true that is. Look, my boy Mike is sick as hell. I'm not going to shit on him too much, but 5 to 10,000 with a force of 300, I don't know if I believe that. That would be an incredible kill-to-death ratio. Assuming all 300 of those guys died, the kill-to-death ratio would be like 20 to 1, which, I mean, that could be possible, right? The Rhodesian Light Infantry in the Rhodesian Bush War had a kill-to-death ratio, or not even the Rhodesian Light Infantry, just like the Rhodesian Defense Forces as a whole, I think, had a kill-to-death ratio of like 10 to 1. So, I mean, 30 to 1, I'm doubting that a little bit, and 30 to 1, once again, is saying all 300 members of the 5 Commando died. But still, they probably got 5,000 is reasonable. 10,000 is insane. 5,000 or 1,000 is each guy got about 3 dudes. That's not half bad. But there was also like millions of rebels. Once again, estimated by Mike, there was millions of rebels. So it could be, possible. And these guys also thought guns didn't work on them. So yeah, that as you think about it more and more, Mike's number seems a little bit more realistic. So that's his end of the time in the Congo. Rescued all those hostages, killed all those Simba rebels, and he kind of chilled out for a little bit before 1978. So in 1978, Seychelles exiles, acting on behalf of former President James Macham, discussed the idea of a coup with South African government officials. So the Seychelles, I'm trying to remember. The Seychelles are named after a British dude. I remember that much. So I'm assuming they were a British colony, or not a French colony, and they were named after a French dude. God damn, my brain is broken right now. So they were a French colony named after a French dude. So Mike's really, he's getting it. You know, worked as a soldier for hire in South Africa, which is a former Dutch and British colony. Fought. He even fought with the Belgians in the Congo, right? Because the Belgians had to go back in and rescue some people, and they fought with Mike. Uh, but I didn't write that down because this guy just did so much shit. It would be impossible to write down all he did. And now he's fighting in a former French colony. He's collecting them all. You know, those are the big three, I'd say, of African colonization. France, I guess Portugal kind of counts a little bit, but yeah, France, the UK, and the Belgians, I would say, are the big three of African colonization. Spanish a little bit, but mostly British and French. Yeah, so now, you know, it's Pokemon. Gotta catch them all. So, Machan had been deposed after France Albert Rene promoted himself to president while Macham was out of the country. Which is just so fucking funny. African politics is hilarious to me. And both of these guys are white, by the way. Which, if you're wondering, no, the Seychelles is not a white country. It's like 97% Seychellian Creole, which is like African, Southeast Asian, and white, like all mixed together. But these guys were white, so they were basically colonial leaders. Oh, and also the Seychelles is basically just a bunch of fucking islands, like tiny little islands all over the Indian Ocean. Which, if you don't know, that's the one between like Africa, Asia, Australia. That's the Indian Ocean, and the Seychelles is like literally like these tiny specks of land all in the middle of that. So now he's going out on an ocean adventure, dude. Mike is a pirate. He ain't taking boats upriver no more. He's sailing the high seas. So Mad Mike was approached by associates of Macham, and he raised a force of 43 to 55 Recce's, Rhodesian, and ex-Congo mercenaries. So Recce's are South African special forces. They call them Recce's because reconnaissance reconnaissance in a military context is basically just like commando type stuff, like operating behind enemy lines, operating far away from everyone else. That's kind of what recce means, right? Like being able to trek over landscapes, get involved in a firefight, and get yourself out. Basically, South African recce's were like commando. Obviously, the American military is different, but that's what these guys were doing. Rhodesians, obviously, and then some of his boys from the Congo. So, in Rhodesia at this point, once again, I don't know if they're referring to, Zambia, Malawi, and all that stuff. Rhodesia was over at this point. I think it was Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and then it just became Zimbabwe. So, yeah, these guys are looking for a fucking fight. And so, in order to sneak this force into the Seychelles, Mike disguised them as a rugby club and hid disassembled AK-47s and a false bottom in their bags. So, and this was another thing. And Mike's into all sorts of weird shit. He named them the Ancient Order of the Froth Blowers, which is the name of an English beer drinking club, which I didn't even know beer drinking clubs existed, but I guess they do. And he named these guys after one of those, and they were called the Ancient Order of the fucking Froth Blowers. And another thing he did is I think he did have a like rugby club or not a rugby club, a beer drinking club that played rugby. And one of the things that they actually did was they like gave out toys. And this might be fake. I don't remember. But they gave out toys. He said one year they went to Mauritius and did it. So I think he actually was doing this, and he was just like, fuck it. I'm just going to say that these guys are part of the Ancient Order of the Froth Blowers, although I don't really fucking know. But that's like important to know. So they would go on these trips, play rugby, and give out toys to disabled kids. Allegedly. Once again, I don't remember if this is true or not. And so, in order to, so the AK-47s are obviously they're metal and wood, they're super heavy, and so in order to like compensate for that, he filled the bags with like these super light toys, right? Like rugby balls, like all that sort of shit, like super light toys to make it seem like, oh well, this bag is heavy just because it's full of shit. But then the rugby ball was taking up like half the room, and all the weight was from the AK. So he basically snuck these guns into the Seychelles under the pretense that he was giving away toys to disabled kids, which it's not the worst thing he's ever done. It's probably pretty far from it, but not a very nice thing either. So the fighting started early when one of the men got in the wrong customs line and had his AK-47 discovered. So this guy accidentally got in the something to claim line, which I don't know how international travel works. But I guess if you have something to claim on your customs form or whatever, you get in that line. He accidentally got in that line. The guy opened his bag, and allegedly the barrel of the AK-47 was sticking out of the false bottom. So this guy goes and runs to like call the cops or whatever. This other dude sees the guy running after he discovered the AK, reassembles his AK, shoots that guy, and then the fighting starts. So, one team was sent to capture a barracks while fighting ensued at the airport. So, even though it got off on a rocky start, Mike was still like, we're here to do a coup. Let's do this fucking coup. Go capture that military barracks. We're going to fight here. Uh, and so, and this is where things get a little bit, once again, I don't really know what happened here. So, during the firefight, a plane made a landing at the airport due to low fuel, and Mike managed to negotiate a ceasefire to evacuate civilians. That's what it says in the article that I read, and this is Wikipedia. The other thing I heard from the African guy whose YouTube video I watched was Mike had a guy in the air control tower tell the plane to land there, right? Tell this, I think it was an Air India plane, which, God, that thing's got enough fuel on it, you know what I mean? They've got some fumes in that thing, but whatever. He told this plane to land at this airport that they were fighting at so they could hijack the plane. But the way the Wikipedia article says it is this plane had to land there because they were low on fuel. Mike managed to negotiate a ceasefire, and then they started fighting. Uh, he did negotiate a ceasefire. That has to be true because all the people got off the plane, and there was kind of a break in the fighting, and then the fighting ensued again. So the fighting resumed, and after a few hours, Mad Mike's men were in an unfavorable. So Mike got fuel for the plane that had landed, and 44 of the mercenaries hopped on and returned to Durban, South Africa. 43 of the 44 men were convicted of hijacking in South Africa, and 4 of the 6 mercenaries who stayed behind were convicted of treason. And then this is the final thing. After his release, Mike wrote several books, some about his exploits, and he studied the Cathars, who were a quasi-dualist, pseudo-Gnostic religious group from southern France, before dying in 2020 at the age of 100. I mean, he fucking did it, dude. Mike did it. That's a life, man. You know, look, is it the best life? Is it the most moral life? No. But, I mean, fighting as a mercenary twice in the Congo, being very successful at it, fighting in World War II, and then trying to do a coup in the Seychelles, he lived good, man. We got to be proud of Mike for this one. Everyone give Mike a round of applause. You might hate him, you might disagree with what he did. I disagree with a lot of what he did, but god damn, the boy did it. The boy Mike did it. All right, that was a bad episode, but I hope as I continue to do episodes back to back, I'll get better at, just keeping my mind going. But that's all I've got for this episode, guys. I hope you have a good day, a good week, a good year, a good life, and I'll see you guys on Friday, probably, unless my roommate, his fucking girlfriend, takes him back. I hope she does. But I'll see you guys then. Peace.